Welcome to the Legendary Backlog, your home of gaming news and all aspects of gaming from retro to current gen. We got you covered. This is episode 8. My name is Brian, and you can find me at TryWinBrian on X.com, and you can find our Patreon at the Legendary Backlog on Patreon. That Patreon will go ahead and give you access to all our YouTube channel, Instagram, everything. So if you want to know more about the podcast, that's really the place to join. It's free or check out. We'd be more than happy to have you help us build a community. Brian, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right. Thank you, Brian. Yeah. Hey, my name is Brian. You can find me at Nostalgic Pixel on X and Blue Sky, as well as Instagram. Yeah. Stream on Twitch as Nostalgic Pixel TV, and I'm going to be posting soon more videos on YouTube at Nostalgic Pixel.
So, man, Brian, how's your week been so far?
It's been pretty good, but I've been busy. I've got company coming this weekend, so I've been trying to get some of the gaming stuff I want to get done, because when they get here, they're not much for any of the video games. So games I've been playing lately, I've been having with all the talk about Switch 2 and the new Mario Kart, is just revisiting Mario Kart 8. I remember I went to a friend's house the other day, just a few weeks ago, and we played the Switch. They were playing Mario Kart. They were playing like 100cc, and I was like, no, you got to go to like 150cc, right? Is it 150 or 120? Is it right? Which is it?
It's 150.
150. So yeah, 150cc. So I'm playing it thinking, oh, okay, let me just get them like a quick gold trophy on one of these. It's like, and I wasn't doing it. I was hoping to get a trophy, and one of my friend's daughters was like, "You're rusty on this, right? You haven't played it in a while." I was like, yeah, that's true. Yep, that's true. So I've been playing it this week. It's been a lot of fun. I have like all gold trophies on like 150cc, but like nothing on mirror and nothing on 200cc. There's one gold trophy left on 120. That's the last one that I have, is silver. And I was even just trying today and getting rejected on that. It's like having some bad luck with getting like the blue shell at the end.
And those blue shells are killer.
Yeah, and that game looks so good.
I love Mario Kart 8, but yeah, those blue shells are killer. Like, man, there's all kind of memes about them and the internet and all that. It's just crazy.
Yeah, and also I've been playing more on my analog pocket. Again, more California games surfing. It's just a score chase where you have like a minute 30 to get as high a score as you can and do quadruple 360s. It's a lot of fun. It was the pack-in game for the Lynx when I got mine a long time ago. Anyway, I also, like I said, was playing on the pocket. It's like I hooked up my arcade stick and played Street Fighter versus X-Men. It was really fun. Really fun. I was playing the arcade one from was it CPS2? Yeah, on the CPS2 board. It was cool. We made a video on that game.
Yeah, that's such a good game. That's such an amazing game, such an amazing concept. Without that game, you might not get the whole Versus series. Without that game, you might not get Tekken Tag. There's a lot of things that just might not happen without that game. Great. You know what? That game has Juggernaut, and I don't think Juggernaut's in any other of the Versus series.
Oh, yeah? He's not in others?
Yeah. No, they got other big characters like in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and all that. They got big characters, but Juggernaut never comes back.
Oh, yeah? Okay. But yeah, I was playing that, and it was fun. It doesn't have the exclusive Japanese Saturn character in the arcade over there, but where it's that comedian they like to put in there. It's fun playing it. I got to play with my old arcade stick that I had for the PlayStation, the Tournament Edition. Anyway, it was a lot of fun playing that. So yeah, that's what I've been playing.
Yeah, those are great games to break out. How'd you feel breaking out Mario now that you've seen the Switch 2 and you're kind of jonesing for some Mario?
It looks amazing. It's like as much of an upgrade or whatever this new one is. This game, even though it was originally on the Wii U and I have it on the Wii U, and then when I got on the Switch, it's just like it's just so polished. And it's pretty. I haven't yet gotten the DLC for the other extra courses, but there's so much of it. I'm looking forward to playing with that.
We got the extra courses. It's pretty nice. We enjoy Mario Kart around here a lot. It's like the go-to for if you just want to have a casual game. It's the cartridge that's always going around between all the switches. That and Animal Crossing.
Oh, I bet. Definitely.
Animal Crossing is big in my house too, but we like to have, like tomorrow night, we're actually having a Mario Kart party. We do this pretty often where I just hook up 4 controllers to one Switch and we just go at it. Even Mom plays, so that's real fun for the kids. they can just constantly tell mom she had to get better at the game. So those are great games to break out. For me, what I've been playing this week, I've been playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I've been trying to get that off of my backlog. I made it to Cosmo Canyon, not to spoil anything, but that's pretty late in the game. If you played the original Final Fantasy VII that was on the PS1, that was pretty far in the game. It was like a little bit right before Disc 2 switched over, so I think I'm getting towards the end. I really enjoy that game. It's amazing how that game makes you realize how far other JRPGs have to go. But there's a couple of thoughts I have on this, right? I think the reason why this game is so polished and the world is so realized is because, first of all, there was a game in 1997, Final Fantasy VII, right? And so you already had a base game and a story and an art style, right? And then on top of that, there's Final Fantasy VII Remake. So they already did the job of remaking the characters and all that and remaking the tone and everything. So it's like this game, they really got to up it. And if you think about it, very few games have that kind of evolution, but having that kind of evolution really brings the world to life. Just the towns, the people, the story. I mean, it's just really good. I think there's a little bit too much to do in that game, personally. I started off the game trying to do everything, and I quickly realized that's just going to take forever to do. I pick and choose what I want to do. You still level up pretty good to keep up with the pace of the game. The combat system's great. And you know what? I had a problem with Final Fantasy Remake because they never really gave me a reason to play as someone else other than Cloud, unless I needed like some specific materia that someone else had. But in this version, switching between people left and right is very important in your party. You want to build up these things called synchronizations, which basically two team members, what they do is they come together and they do like a defensive special move or an offensive special move. And those are like regular characters still have limit breaks and stuff like that, but those synergized moves, while they take a while to build up, you can make those super powerful and they can literally stagger bosses like real easy. So, which in that game, your goal is to stagger an enemy and then nuke them down, pretty much. So in the combat. So I've been really enjoying that. The other game I've been playing around since I'm kind of in between, before I got really into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth again, is I've been playing around with Luminous on the Switch. I have Luminous on the PS5, but there's something about laying in bed before you go to bed and just listening to Luminous and playing that game that is amazing,
Yeah, I also have it on the Switch. It's great, but I like to get it wherever I can.
Such a good game. I wish more people liked Luminous. I wish more people bought Luminous. This is just my selfishness because it's such a good game.
Is it not so well? I mean, they make it for everything. I thought it did pretty well.
Well, you would think so, but I'd like to see more sequels to it, right? That's where my problem is. I feel like the one we have on the PlayStation 5 is the same one that came out on the PlayStation 3, if I remember correctly.
It's the same, like the remastered the original, so from the PSP. That's what we were playing on the Switch and on the PlayStation. The last recent current one was the Vita version was the most latest release that was not a remake, and then you're at the PS3 after that.
Yeah, and I played the hell out of that. Yeah, but the thing is, the Vita version is my favorite. Personally, the Vita version is my favorite.
Yeah, it's the latest edition and not like a remaster.
I love Luminous. I could play that forever. So I've been really enjoying that. Picking up the Switch has made me really realize that the Switch has a lot of good games. Really no rush to get a Switch 2 unless you just have to have the tech. There's tons of games to play on the Switch for me that are on my backlog while we're here talking about our backlogs. So today is a special console edition. So we're going to be talking about the Sega Saturn launch, specifically focusing on the launch of the Sega Saturn, mostly in North America. We're going to bring up things like Japan and stuff like that. But we're going to go ahead and skip the news section this week and talk about the Sega Saturn launch. It's something I think it's important to gaming history, and I think it's a real neat story. It's something that we like to basically tell you our perspectives of how we saw it and how it was around us at the time. So kind of with the launch of the Sega Saturn, I guess the story kind of starts with the advertising campaign. So there was $50 million in advertising campaign, including coverage and publications such as Wired and Playboy. And I guess back in the day, in the 90s, that's where you wanted to be, especially Wired. That's still kicking around today, I think. So why don't you go ahead and give me your thoughts on the $50 million advertisement? Do you remember any of the advertisements for the Sega Saturn before it came out or around launch time? Did they have any impressions on you?
Well, those are just a few of the publications they published on. They're all over the game magazines. Like EGM had coverage of it and everything. And like games, the other ones.
Yeah, all the major games coverage, all the major game publications had, or we should say magazines back then. had coverage of it, which was really big.
Yeah, not quite website. Well, there were. All right, I didn't know of the Saturn website at first. Maybe IGN later, but it was n64.com at that around that time. But that was even like a year later or whatever. So this is so. But anyway, because it came out many months earlier in Japan, like there was a lot of coverage in it in like magazines in America. So you clearly knew about it on its way. I can't say I was a little too young for Playboy. But yeah, because it's a technology-driven console or whatever, that it's the 32-bit. I can see Wired picking a story up on that as well. But it was talked about. It just I think it was confusing because at the same time the 32X was either out or coming out around there. So I don't know. You knew it was the next thing. But there's a lot of arcade ports, which is cool. So if you want to see the future of Sega, you can go to the arcade.
Yeah. That's true. So one of the things to kind of talk about is that at the time of this advertising and video game coverage and EGM and other magazines, the Saturn was already out in Japan. So this wasn't the situation where they were covering something that was mysterious and unknown, unreleased to the public. It was a situation where they were actually covering. They knew the hardware, they knew the games that existed, they knew what was capable. So that was an interesting time where systems came out first in Japan. That doesn't really happen much anymore because North American market is so huge. All right, let's talk about the early advertising for the system was targeted at mature audience in the Genesis. So it was more mature audience than they advertised for the Genesis.
Yeah, so like they were teenagers for the Genesis, and then after that they're going for the 20s and stuff. They were a little bit younger than like the rooftop parties for the Switch launch, but not too far from there.
And if you look at the Genesis from a pure aesthetic perspective, at least this is a 1995 and 6, right? Or 1995 when it launched. The hardware looks more slicker. You can tell it's not like a kid's machine. They're trying to make it like a high tech for everybody machine,
Yeah, I mean, let's just face it, though. The thing is pretty boxy. I always saw it as a black box. It did. I thought the focus was really taken off just the shape of the console, more like, look at what it's doing. The one thing I also thought was confusing is like it has that expansion port at the top there for like the memory cards and the RAM. I always wanted to I always thought it'd be so cool if that played Genesis cartridges off there, but it didn't. It never was. But I always thought, man, that'd be the coolest backwards compatible. Like
that would have been cool.
Play your Genesis and Saturn.
That was another thing, it had so many places that you could, during the launch, when they covered it, there were so many places that you could add on things, and people were thinking about like the 32X would be an add-on or something like that down the road. Had a lot of kind of mysterious on what Sega was going to do, because Sega haven't known to do anything, like add a CD-ROM to a cartridge system, add, double the graphical capabilities. So with the 32X. So at this point, we didn't know what Sega was going to do with those expansion packs. That's interesting because, consoles nowadays don't really come with that at all, I guess the PlayStation with the storage, but that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, you had to get a memory card. It had extra memory or had internal memory, but it uses a battery, which is great until the battery dies. That's usually every few years. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, it also you're talking about the pack-in games, right?
Well, I was going to go over Genesis for a little bit. Is that okay with you before we get to the game?
Yeah, go for it.
So it was a successor to the Genesis. The Genesis sold 18 million units in North America, so it was very successful in North America. It was lagging behind in Japan. So this was the end of the Genesis, the beginning of the Saturn when it launched. To us in America, we just got the 32X, where the 32X has kind of been failing in Japan. I had a 32X at my house. My dad bought me one because he didn't want to get me a Sega Saturn. And we got some pretty good games. We had Star Wars and we had Virtua Fighter and Knuckles. And I played the hell out of Virtua Fighter on the Genesis. Me and my 4 buddies that I grew up with, we just every day we played Virtua Fighter for like 3 months. We loved it, and it was a terrible version. It was just so terrible. But when I saw Virtua Fighter on the Sega Saturn at launch time, I was like, "Oh my god, that's the most beautiful game ever." What was your kind of thoughts about the Genesis ending and kind of coming in with the Saturn?
Well, I had the Genesis for a long time, and I also at that point already had upgraded with the Sega CD, which I really enjoyed. The 32X, I didn't ever get that, but that was at a point when this game came out, and like around there, like I was no longer allowed to have or play any video games in the house. I got to play it at the store a lot and at friends' houses, and I ended up when it launched, I rented it at Blockbuster, and kept it over at a friend's house and played it there. And we played Panzer Dragoon a lot, and they had Daytona USA. But Panzer Dragoon, like that game, was the one that was like this for me. I thought this was the coolest thing, and and it's so original, and it was felt like an extension of like where not I don't know, it wasn't the Sonic team that had anything to do with it, was it?
I don't
I
know.
don't think so. Anyway, it felt like a really cool like Sega game that had like some mystique or whatever, like some whatever, maybe had some Fantasy Star energy.
Yeah, it looked like it had the kind of like the same universe as Fantasy Star, but it wasn't, from the Dragon kind of perspective.
But I had the Sega CD, and I was fully on board with games being on CD for the extra storage, which just meant like they could, wouldn't have to reuse any sprites as often if they ever wanted to. The music was always really good because it was often from the CD, and just had extra capabilities of video in some forms that was actually good. But yeah, it was on CD, which is great because you're also thinking this is going to bring a way to bring the cost of these games down so you can play more of them.
See, that's really neat. But one of the things I want to stress to the listeners is like in the early '90s, CD-ROMs were very cutting edge technology. Not everybody, like people that had home computers, not everybody at that time had a CD-ROM. Some people were still using floppy disk 3.5. So, like had the system having a CD-ROM in it was, pretty high tech is what I'm trying to get at,
Yeah, I think I had a Mac with a CD-ROM at that time.
Macs are always on top of their game.
Well, that was the thing. I had a 2CI, and I wanted for Christmas either like a CD-ROM or a modem for my computer. And it turned out the computer was too old for either of those, and I ended up getting a whole computer, which was really cool. The Performance 630. It was neat, and I enjoyed it.
That's the way to go, man. Get that whole computer. Yeah.
He later added a TV tuner to it and stuff. And when I was in college, you could play video games through, like plug the PlayStation in to it or the N64 as just another screen. So like someone could use the TV.
Yeah.
It was fun.
That's a pretty good experience there. So the Sega Saturn was launched in North America with the surprise launch on May 11th, 1995. It was 4 months before the scheduled release date, which left a lot of people kind of surprised and at the same time left developers kind of a little angry because their games weren't ready for it yet. Like they promised the release date would be later. Do you remember the surprise launch? I do, because I remember going to Toys R Us and being like, wow, I can't believe it's already here.
Oh yeah, I remember going to the store like Toys R Us there, and it's like, wow, it really is here,
And you could play it at Toys R Us.
Because it's like they went to that convention and they announced it. Yeah, you can get it at the stores today. That was so crazy. And also the news that was going around that day, not only was around, but like their competitor with Sony coming to the market for the first time with PlayStation. That's the same day they announced $299. So they announced that they're coming a few months later for $100 cheaper.
But that was a real detriment to the Saturn launch.
Oh yeah, it had heavy competition, and it wasn't from Nintendo. Nintendo's sitting this out for a while.
Yeah, but at that time, people didn't really have the same recognition for Sony in gaming. Now, Sony was a huge brand for TVs, Walkmans, and other things, but they didn't have the recognition for gaming at that time that Sega did. But yeah,
they had no legacy. They had some parts in the industry legacy, but it wasn't like this is their first console for sure.
Yeah,
it was a lot of question marks on how that was going to work.
So like Sony didn't have the name brand they have today in games, is what I'm trying to point out. And Sega had a more of a lineage, but the lineage for Sega was kind of up and down. And then that $299 price tag, that's the equivalent of like the Xbox One X coming out at $500, and then Sony saying, "Hey, ours PlayStation 4 is $399." So it looks like Sony has a record of doing this.
Yeah, it's worked for them every time, it seems.
And that's one thing, right? Is like it seems like the lower the price of the console, the higher the adoption rate. But that's not always true when it comes to systems. You would think it would be that way, but that's not true.
It's largely true. But there's a lot of games that have small audiences that need a huge, wide base to release the game. So a lot of times there's some really good obscure games that come out at the end of a system's life cycle, because it's a safer bet they can reach that audience because it's already a small audience, but the install base is so high.
Yeah. So, it was a wonderful time. You had to be there. The Sega just announced the surprise launch. You go to Toys R Us. You're a kid or teenager, whatever. and or early adult, and you could play Street Fighter, or not Street Fighter, Virtual Fighter right there. It looks amazing. I mean, like back then, those polygons just looked so clean. I mean, I was like, wow, it almost looks like real life. It was a special time and place.
Yeah, it definitely felt like these are really competent arcade ports, and they're doing a great job. In fact, in some ways, they could surpass.
Surprise launch went, let's just say, not as well as they thought, right? Let's talk a little bit about the architecture of the Saturn. That's one of the things we knew about before it came to America. And it was a big talk at the time because this was the 5th generation of consoles. So everybody was wondering, what can these machines do? The Saturn had a dual CPU architecture and 8 processors. Some of the developers' thoughts on this was that it was going to be a very impressive machine and it would be hard to learn. But once you learn it, you can really maximize it and get more out of Sony's PlayStation. That was a little bit of the talk going around during and before the launch. What are your thoughts on the dual architecture?
From my understanding, the word around the street was just it was powerful but complicated, and it seemed like developers were struggling to wrap their head around it in some ways, especially when everything was talking about 3D this, 3D that, and this was like a 2D powerhouse.
Right. It had so to go a little bit deeper in the architecture of the Saturn, is it did have 2 CPUs, but and each one of them have 4 processors, right? But the problem is that they shared one bus, so you couldn't utilize them both at the same time. So when you break down the Saturn on paper, you're like, oh my god, this would kill a PlayStation. It's faster, it's got more processing power, but the problem is you can only channel like 50% of it at a time. So that's why certain games work really well on the Saturn, like 2D, because you can use like the background in one processor and the other processor can be the character and like switch back and forth, it kind of gives that smooth gameplay. That was really interesting, I thought, about the Saturn doing that.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, exotic architecture, but it does a lot of cool things. Part of the reason why it seemed like it took a while before even a working emulator for that Saturn was available anywhere.
It took years for a good emulator. I mean, we're talking like I was out of college before there was a good emulator.
Yeah, it's taken a while.
Just because it was so weird to program for, like you said, it was such a headache to program for.
And its polygons, if I don't remember correctly, they were 4-sided instead of 3-point. They're 4-point polygons, so they're square polygons, which just made it more work to render each one.
That I did not read about, but that's interesting. So their polygons were square only?
Yeah, 4 sides, not 3. Yeah, not 4 points, not 3.
That doesn't make any sense at all.
It was the early days of 3D, but yeah, if you look at the models, you'll see they're all 4 points. They're all square. So they had to redo stuff when they're like porting games over, like Resident Evil. They had to like rework their models.
This is back at, like, we're lucky today because if you make a game for the PlayStation 4, it's pretty much going to run on Xbox with a little bit of tweaks because they both use the same kind of architecture. But back then, systems were completely different. And if you made the same game, a lot of times you were like reprogramming it again almost, or rebuilding it, a lot of it.
Yeah, sometimes they'd even be a completely different studio that would tackle the porting of it.
Right. So one of the things we mentioned about the room to add on hardware earlier, the video cable was the same as the Genesis one.
Well, it's the same capability, yeah, but a different actual cable. Actually, no, well, I believe it's the same as the Genesis Model 2 style video port, and that those are compatible, I believe. If not, it's just its own Saturn one, but it has the same capabilities. So people in Europe are loving it. In Japan with their JP21, and Europe with the RGB SCARTs. We're just getting amazing pictures out of these games, out of the systems. This system, just like the Genesis, has a very sharp video signal that comes out of it. It's really clean.
Since we're talking about the launch specifically, now, Brian, you know that I think the Saturn has the best controller, but when I was doing research about the launch,
not the first model,
I looked up the Model 1 North America. I believe it or not, I never actually held one of those.
Oh yeah, I have them.
They are terrible looking. I don't know if they feel good, but they are terrible looking.
Boy, yeah, that was And those are the ones, like those are the ones we had. Like when it first came out, when I rented the system, like those, I remember those controllers. And like these are, these are really bad. These aren't, but they're. I mean, well, they're not okay. They're not really really bad, but they're like considering the model that came out in Japan and the ones that we got later. That one, the next controller was amazing. And I also remember too, like going to the like Target, and they had the kiosk for the Saturn, and it was playing later on, like nights, and you got to play the 3D controller, and it was their first like 3D controller. Like this was like a year or so later. Yeah, that was just the Model 1 controller is just not desirable, and it's amazing leap and improvement on the Japanese and like Model 2 controller that we got. It's huge difference. I mean, that other one's just epic. But the first one's just a big
Yeah,
miss.
and that was released in North America and Europe. Yeah, that controller needs help. But you know what? What I will say about the Saturn controller is I think it was, if you look back to the Super Nintendo, which is basically what the Genesis was competing against. First of all, the Genesis only had 3 buttons to start with, right? So that was kind of a mistake.
Oh yeah, and almost every game is 3 buttons. The amount of 6-button games on a Genesis, it's a small list.
Yeah, and the thing is that Street Fighter was so big. I mean, you would go to everybody's house, they were playing Street Fighter. I mean, it was just like almost expected if you had a console, you had Street Fighter 2. That was how big Street Fighter 2 was back in the day. And people complain about game prices, but Street Fighter 2 back in the day I saw it one time for like $80 at Service Merchandise. So, and that was back in the 90s.
Yeah, even though I had both systems, I had already picked up Street Fighter 2 on Super Nintendo and then bought it again with the Street Fighter 2 Turbo. So when Super came out and when the Genesis one came out, I said, no thanks. And largely with the Genesis, because I knew if I got that, I had to get 2 more controllers or another arcade stick, because that was, it was just, it seemed like I ask a lot that you have to buy 2 new controllers for this game. But anyway, it's such an awesome game, though. It's so amazing. And at first, I didn't quite pick up what like the Saturn was doing with like continued like Street Fighter games. At first, it's like, okay, yeah, that just looks like I wasn't quite picking up how much better improved it was until later versions of those games on that system.
Yeah, what I was going to say though is circling back is with Street Fighter being so popular the generation before, you could tell this controller was made with that in mind, with the 6-button layout, That's my personal opinion.
Oh yeah, this one was built in. No, this is its first one with a 6-button layout, and it's nice. 6-button face button layout is great. Even the N64 has a 6-button layout. But yeah, it's nice.
At the time of the North America launch of the Sega Saturn, Japan, it had already been out for a while, and they had sold 1 million units for the Sega Saturn, whereas Sony PlayStation had only sold 300,000 units. So then they come out with the surprise launch in North America. It kind of came out to mixed reviews. Sony pulled the rug out from underneath them with the $299 console, like we talked about. So there was a lot of people waiting to see what the PlayStation would be like. And then with the surprise launch, a lot of developers weren't ready, so there wasn't too many games to play. So it was a mixed relaunch. It was a mixed reaction launch. It wasn't a dream launch. It wasn't the worst launch, but it was definitely like a mixed reaction launch. What is your overall opinion?
Well, it didn't do Sega any favors coming out early like that, because it just upset a lot of retailers, which then when it came to like putting it on their shelves, it was just like they didn't see as much interest in it. But like that, and then developers weren't ready, and so when the developers were ready, they were releasing the games day and date, like on the PlayStation and the Saturn. So they didn't get any advance of getting some, their other games out. It was like the launch games that came out, and then it was like a pretty calm release date until like later on when the PlayStation was on the market.
True.
I remember seeing, like, we were talking about Street Fighter, and one of the earliest Street Fighter Saturn games I remember is the Street Fighter like 2, the movie, the game. So it's like a Mortal Kombat, digitized graphics from the movie of Street Fighter playing Street Fighter. So it
was a terrible game.
That one, That one I wasn't that interested in.
It was a terrible game. You get after 1 year of that game being out, you could find it used everywhere for like $9. It was just sitting there. People would pick it up because, oh my god, it's such a deal, and then they just put it down. This is terrible. So we talked a lot about the hardware, the circumstances of the launch, some of the advertisement, everything, the kind of like the whole thing about the launch. Let's talk about some of the Sega Saturn launch games.
Okay.
You talked a little bit about Daytona USA. That was an arcade port. You want to kind of go ahead and give us your opinion of that?
So yeah, at this time in my life, I was able to drive and I like to go to the arcade. So being able to play this at home or at a friend's house, it was a at first it was just amazed that this was something, I was able to play, because the closest they had with racing in 3D was just the virtual racing, which is good, but like Daytona USA took it to another level. Is is even though this isn't arcade perfect, it was still amazing. I really enjoyed it because like it wasn't that deep, but the replayability was strong. You know.
Yeah. Everybody loved Daytona USA back in the day. I can't think about anybody that didn't. It was a real popular arcade for sure, especially with the wheel and everything and the whole, how Sega does great with their arcades, presentation, like fill everything.
Oh yeah, the arcades you could like line them up. There'd be like four people racing at once. It was
Exactly.
awesome.
And the Sega Saturn port was amazing. I mean, it was fun. It was real simple. It was like that simple, easy, but hard to master gameplay, Like, I mean, if you wanted to really.
And it got later releases on the Saturn. One included the ability to play with their NetLink, so you could play other people online in Daytona USA. That was cool. It was one of their
Yeah.
early online games.
I think I really enjoyed Daytona USA. That was like my warm up game, to be honest, with the Sega Saturn. When I go to my friend's house, we would always warm up with like a race or two each with Daytona, and then we would pop in what we were going to play that night.
Yeah, it wasn't two player at once, right? It was only one player, right?
I remember it being one player.
Yeah. So it's all about taking turns.
Basically, that was one of the launch games. And then we talked about Virtua Fighter. That was such an amazing game back then for me. I mean, I just couldn't believe that was on a home console. I thought the future was here. I was like,
and Virtua Fighter Remix came shortly after, if I remember correctly.
oh, that's such a good game. That's one of those games we're going to have to cover one day.
Well, it was like Virtua Fighter was a competent like arcade port, but Virtua Fighter Remix is like here now. Look what else the Saturn can do, and was even more advanced, and especially they added like textures and stuff to the characters.
Yeah, you know what? I wish Sega would have kept the Virtua Fighter Remix series going. With all the crazy stuff like the car and everything. It was just so awesome. There was Pebble Beach Golf Links, which, kind of came out to mixed reviews. Decent golf game. They basically said if you played one golf game, you can, at that time, they're pretty much all the same.
Yeah, and it just caters to that a little bit older audience they were targeting as well, saying, hey, guys, now you can take those arcade beach, volleyball game or beach golf games and take it home.
Well, you know how I feel about this now that I'm a dad and everything. I like see this as like, okay, like your kids you're gonna get the Saturn, and the kids are gonna do like Virtua Fighter or Panzer Dragon, and then when the kids go to bed, dad's gonna play golf. It's like that's kind of how I saw this title now. It's like,
yeah, definitely, it's something for dad to play as well.
There was Clockwork Knight. That was a 2D game that mixed 2D sprites with polygons. So that was unique.
So like a Donkey Kong Country type of deal, but with more scaling and stuff of sprites. It was really cool and colorful. It's like a little Toy Story, but not Toy Story, right?
Yeah, it was basically Toy Story before Toy Story came out, which is actually a really cool idea. You played as a knight that went around that was a toy and tried to rescue other toys, and I haven't played it personally, but I got a lot of impressions for this episode, and most people said it's a pretty fun game once you get into it. So, do you have that in your collection?
Yeah, they even made a sequel. Yeah, I have it, and I thought I had the sequel. No, I don't have the sequel, at least the American version. I think I had it at one point. I might have traded it, but I think if I remember correctly, I traded a copy of the first Clockwork Knight, but I have the first one.
Yeah. And then we talked a little bit about Panzer Dragoon, but oh my god, that's such a good game.
Oh, so great. That game. Yeah, and from that one, they made a sequel, and then they made an awesome RPG one, Saga, which unfortunately is not only expensive but rare, and they haven't really followed up on another one with that.
Yeah,
Except, as far as RPG like that, but there was a Xbox Xbox release, and that was about it.
Panzer Dragoon was so good and it was so hard. People would just sit there and play that forever. Like the first couple levels are like pretty easy, like nothing, but like later on, it's pretty hard to get past those levels. At least it was when I was a kid. I got it on the Switch and I played it again. I still got that impression.
Oh yeah, this game got remade, and it's on the Switch and the PlayStation.
Yeah, you brought up Panzer Dragoon Saga. I just gotta say, one of the best games ever. The dragon combat in that game is phenomenal. The world is pretty decent that they built, but like the dragon combat is what you play that game for. The story is really good too. A lot of people think that Panzer Dragoon Saga is what Final Fantasy VII, the original, should have been. I personally don't think that. I think they're different games, but one of the things I am sad about is Sega was really quit making RPGs unless you count Yakuza, you know?
Well, that you do count Yakuza because they're really putting all their RPG into it. But it's not really now that they're
They have Atlas.
now that they're part of Atlas. Atlas generates a lot of RPGs for them.
Atlas-based good RPGs. Another launch game for the Sega Saturn was World Soccer Sega International Victory Gold Edition. Now, that is a title if I've ever seen one. This game was actually pretty fun. I did play it. It was very arcadey. And I think this is something that I actually think that our market is kind of missing right now is an arcadey soccer game. You know, not everything has to be like FIFA and so realistic.
Yeah, but isn't this one also full 3D?
It is 3D. And but it plays so good.
Well, that's good.
Like it's very arcadey and it plays so snappy. Like when you're passing the ball and you're moving, the controls are really nice. So, you know, I've never been like a huge soccer fan. I've never really had, I take that back. I've had one soccer game that I played a lot of, and that was Wild Card on the PS2. But this soccer game at my friend's house, we played for about a week, you know, 2 players going at it. And it's really fun. It's got good responses. For a launch game, I think this was maybe a surprise. That if you bought it, you'd be surprised how fun it is. So that's the launch games for the Sega Saturn. If you had to pick, let's say you're going to the store and you're going to get 2 games, which ones would you get?
Well, knowing that they made another Virtua Fighter just a few months later, that's like an updated just version of it.
Well, this is the launch. You don't know that.
I'd still get, I'd probably still pick up Panzer Dragoon and Daytona USA. Although Virtua Fighter is a good choice, but if only 2, I'd go with those.
If only 2, I'd go with Panzer Dragoon and Virtua Fighter. I think Virtua Fighter just sings on the Sega Saturn. You know what? For 6 games, they actually pack a punch. You know, there's only 6 launch games, but there's a little bit for everybody. You know, Clockwork Knight, you know, kind of for the kids that want like a 2D side scroller.
Yeah, it never got its Sonic game that it really needed.
No, it never did.
At least for American appetite for the audience.
That's sad. It was such a 2D powerhouse system, never saw a 2D Sonic. You know, you got Daytona, that's your racing game. You got Panzer Dragoon, that's kind of like your RPG-ish game.
Yeah, and you got to remember, this was $3.99, so you already spent $400. Now you're going to buy some games.
Right. And Pebble Beach, like we said, that's for the dad. Virtua Fighter, that's kind of like your fighter for everybody. And then World Soccer, if you want that arcade feeling, you know. So it's pretty decent lineup for 6 games. Not bad. But the only problem with it is it took like 4 months for other games to come out because of the surprise launch. So, or most of the games, it took 4 months. I apologize, not all. So, Brian, any final thoughts on the Saturn's launch?
Well, their launch was like it kind of tripped on itself out the gate with its price being beaten by the competitor just a few months later and announced the same day. And the games, I was excited. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I ran out and rented it. And I thought the games were really cool. It just, it just came out with fierce competition. And then like Nintendo came out a year later. However, I still always liked the system, even though it had its own trouble. I enjoyed the games that I was playing on it, that I got to play on it. And shortly, like, I think sometime in the early 2000s, I went and revisited a lot of the Saturn. And then, because I kept noticing, like, for the longest time, games came out in Japan on the Saturn well after it had kind of faded away here. But it's an awesome system. I love to revisit and play and discover. And the fan translations and stuff have been nice. Getting access to like games that you didn't in the past, because even if you had it, in your hand, it's in Japanese. But it's an awesome system. I really love it. It's just too bad it made so many missteps at launch. It hurt it.
Yeah, I think the launch, especially in North America, backfired on them. I think Sony, classic Sony now, but at the time it was cutthroat and new. They dropped the price.
And in Japan, this thing was doing great. In fact, it's Sega's best-selling console for them in Japan before, like, even though the Genesis did amazing in North America, and it probably did pretty good in Europe. It was their number one in Japan for all of their systems. It's done the best for them there. And they had a lot of cool stuff.
There's like something like 700 games that didn't come out in America.
75% of the Saturn's library is exclusive to Japan.
Yeah.
So these aren't just the same copies or ports. These are just exclusive titles at 75%. It's like 700 games. Even, and then like, so, they're like, maybe it's those other games or whatever. And like, no, these are mostly, full-blown games and not like slideshows. So it's got an awesome collection. And one of the things going back is like these games that they came out were like arcade perfect on the Saturn, or even improved. And that at this time hadn't happened really, unless your name is Neo Geo, but because it's the same regardless. But yeah, the Saturn was seeing amazing arcade perfect ports. And so it's fun to revisit for those reasons.
The end of its life, it definitely did. We would be here all night if we talked about the life cycle of the whole Saturn. Yeah. The ups and downs, the games that were key, the games that should have been key, the games that really failed, the games that did well on the PlayStation, did terrible on the Saturn. I mean, we would be here all night talking about that.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, for me as a Saturn owner, like, I enjoyed my Genesis and I had the Sega CD. I was disappointed with the 32X, and I was also upset a little bit with the I thought there should have been more output for the Sega CD, because I just thought I loved its capabilities, its added capabilities. I thought there just should have been more on it, or more, pushing it. But whatever. I was thrilled that the Saturn was also a CD-ROM system, and they were going to continue that going forward because it made sense.
I wanted a Saturn from the beginning. Before the surprise launch, I wanted one. After the surprise launch, I wanted one. Finally got one. I didn't have much money, and my family didn't have much money back in the day, so we got it whenever they dropped the price and put the 3 games in it. That was really cool.
Yeah, and for me, I wasn't, at the time when it came out, I wasn't allowed to have, or get a video game console. So it wasn't until at 97 was I able to get a console, and at that point, the writing was clearly already on the wall for the Saturn. So I ended up getting an N64, and then shortly after got a PlayStation.
Well, the Saturn launch was kind of mixed bag, and it basically was a failure. I don't want to call it a failure, because around my friends there was so much hype for the Sega Saturn, but it really was a failure.
And it's got a great library, so it's just it was a failure for their for in America.
Yeah, in America in 1998 they discontinued the Saturn. Pretty sad. Saturn was sold all the way up till 2000 in Japan.
Oh yeah, they kept releasing games a lot for a long time. It was a different story when the Dreamcast came out there versus here.
And the Dreamcast is another episode.
Yeah, that'll be fun to talk to in the future. So stay tuned, and fingers crossed you'll hear that one someday.
All right. So do you have anything else to add, Brian?
Well, like you said, this system is amazing. We could talk about it forever, but yeah, today we're just going to be talking about the launch, which was fun. It, we said it, tripped up on launch. The games were cool, but it's just, it had its struggle. It's just interesting that poorly as it came out, it still looked on so fondly, and that's largely due to the library.
Time has been really good to the Saturn.
And people are starting to discover it these days that just were definitely not around for it at all, but it's amazing. Even like the hardest core Nintendo fans, you'll find at some point when they're done collecting whatever Nintendo game, they'll start looking at the Sega and looking at the Saturn.
The Sega Saturn has really grown with fondness over time. You, as a retro collector, know that the library is just outrageously priced. There wasn't that many prints of a lot of games.
Yeah, it happens when a console is considered a failure. Like they don't sell as many copies of games, and after a while, they become harder to find.
So you could kind of say like the Saturn was kind of like the unicorn of that generation.
Yeah, so this is like the mid '90s, like straight in the middle, 1995, and here they're coming out with this, and now 3D is taken off. And, it's also, a lot of these games like Virtua Fighter are arcade games, and Daytona USA are, born from the arcade with more advanced hardware doing 3D. So Sega knew 3D was their, the future. This was showing off all those games. Yeah, this was a huge console war that just was, kind of back in the day when this kind of stuff could happen. It was something else.
It's like this, right? Sega had a chance when Sony was the only competitor, but once the 64 came out, pretty much over for the Sega Saturn.
Yeah, when there was when Nintendo was, delayed with their system and we ended up going cartridge for the last time. It was, with them in the market and PlayStation taking off, and PlayStation really did. It was just the writing was on the wall for them.
It was too much to overcome. It's so interesting how different regions will have different favorite systems back in the day.
Oh, sure. You go to South America and they love the Master System. It was a huge success.
They also love the Genesis. The Genesis sold forever. And the PS2, the only reason why the PS2 was still releasing MLB The Show for so long on the PlayStation 2 is because of Brazil. It was still like a top-selling game in Brazil. There.
Yeah, and they made Street Fighter 2 on the Master System in Brazil. That's how long its staying power was. That back, when that game was out, it got a port.
So, Brian, what are you doing this week? What you up to?
Well, got company in town, so gaming's going to be pretty limited and stuff. But I'm looking forward to their visit, so it'll be good. That's one thing again with the Analog Pocket. I'll be playing some of that, and I'll probably try playing the Switch more handheld mode. I still want to play I want to play Resident Evil, but I'm not going to have a chance to while I have company. But I will test out the Bluetooth headphones. Maybe at night I'll be able to get some in.
That's right, man. Play through Tears of the Kingdom. This week I'm going to be continuing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It's probably going to take me a couple weeks to get through that. I've really been enjoying Luminous, but I'm kind of jonesing to play an RPG on the Switch, so we'll see what ends up there. Why or how I play two RPGs at one time, I'm not really sure. I think I'm kind of crazy, but that's what I like to do. Well, that's what we're up to this week. You can find me, Trywin Brian, on X, and you can find the legendary backlog on Patreon. We really encourage you to go there, join for free. We're just trying to build a nice community, and it's got links to all our websites. Where can people find you, Brian?
Yes, thank you. You can find me on Nostalgic Pixel for X and Blue Sky and Instagram as well. If I do try to play anything on a stream, you'll find it on Twitch. It is under Nostalgic Pixel TV. I have my website, Nostalgic Pixel. I've been writing some stuff up, including even things on film and not just games. So I'm excited for that. Yeah, hopefully I'm working on some future videos for my YouTube channel, Nostalgic Pixel. But between that, check out our Patreon.
Yes, and if you do listen to this on a podcast app, please leave us a 5-star review. You can leave a 5-star review on Spotify. You can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We thank you for listening and hope you enjoyed the show.
See you next time.